I think all 10 of our points are extremely valid for the heartland. This pandemic is going to be a real challenge for cities and states across this country. Those that have a strategy and that are intentional and that see in this horrific crisis and challenge and opportunity, they are going to be the places that do better. That's what's heartened me, is how much Americans want to get back to work, want to get back to doing things, don't want to cower in place.
Hi, this is Angie Cooper, Executive Director of Heartland Summit, and I'm pleased to have joining me today Richard Florida, one of Heartland Forward's research fellows and a university professor at the University of Toronto and a fellow at NYU. Richard, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
It's great to see you. I'm happy to see you, but I'm only kind of bummed because I had such a great time at the last summit. I was so looking forward to coming and actually bringing my wife and kids to spend time with you. But hopefully we'll see each other soon.
We are planning on hopefully something soon, and it's hard to believe it would have been April 22nd and 23rd. And we'll go ahead and jump right in, talking about, you've recently co-authored How Our Cities Can Reopen After the COVID-19 Pandemic, a 10-point preparedness plan for our communities. It's truly a great read because it offers a glimmer of hope and really concrete advice on how we should handle the next phase of this to really get back to some version of normal life. What made you tackle preparedness for the after when many cities were still struggling to mitigate the spread of the virus by social distancing and closing cities?
I don't have a perfect recollection, but I probably wrote that 2 weeks before it was published. When you think about having to write it, editing it, and getting it out. So, I think about March 13th or 14th, if my memory is right, we began to realize that we're going to have to shut down. This thing looked far worse than just about anyone certainly I realized. And at that point, people were talking about lockdowns, shutting down cities, preparing, mobilizing, creating health system capacity to deal with the virus. And of course, the economic fallout, the federal government providing assistance for workers, for businesses. And it seemed to me that was all important, but that at some point we're going to have to reopen. And I didn't want us to get caught with our pants down twice. I mean, it's a silly phrase, but really, let's think about what's going to happen over the next 6 weeks to 8 weeks, because we could look at what happened at Wuhan, which was already starting to think about reopening, and what would happen in our city. So what I began to think about is we're going to have to reopen. I thought, and we're not going to be able to test and trace yet. Of course, we want to be able to test and trace, but we can't do that probably yet. It's hard to mobilize. It's going to take a while to get antiviral treatments or a vaccine. So what would you do to reopen? You would have to figure out ways to do social and physical distancing, to equip people with personal protective gear, to provide services in a way that was functional. And because I'm dealing with cities, that's what I do. It's small businesses and arts and cultural organizations were all important. We'll get to it. But cities have these huge assets, like arenas, convention centers, airports, transit stations, train stations, all of which are really hard to retrofit, right? You just think about what happened after 9/11, the horrible terrorist attacks, what happened in our airports. So with all of that in mind, with a colleague named Stephen Pedigo, we wrote this kind of 10-point plan for reopening cities, which of course, given it's been the better part of a month, we've actually gotten some of the stuff better over time.
You're one of two inaugural research fellows at Heartland Forward, the think and do tank for the Heartland. And as you know well, at Heartland Forward, we're focused on non-coastal America. Which of your 10 points do you think are most critical for officials and civic leaders in the Heartland? And what are some of the post-pandemic challenges these places will face looking ahead?
Yeah, so one of the really cool things that we're doing at Heartland Forward, as well as some really kind of forward-looking research on small firms and entrepreneurial ecosystems, is with my colleague Ross Duvall, who is the intellectual brains behind Heartland Forward, And my dear friend, Joel Kotkin, most people don't know that. They think we're mortal enemies, but in fact, we're dear friends. And even when Joel and I debate, I learn more from Joel and our debates and his criticism of me than from anyone. So, and we've actually kind of put our heads together and are beginning to think about, a reopening and longer term recovery strategy for Northwest Arkansas, the Delta region, and then the Heartland. Look, I've spent even though I'm from the coast, Newark, New Jersey, I'm from the coast. I'm from Newark. And I spent the first 21 years of my life out on the East Coast. I went to Rutgers College. For most of my adult life, I've lived in the Heartland. I spent nearly 20 years at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and now another 13 at the University of Toronto, another Great Lakes city. So I know the Heartland well. And obviously what happened is our economy became a knowledge economy. The coasts benefited disproportionately. If you look at high-tech startups, I think it's something like 2/3 to 3/4 of those startups have been concentrated either in the Bay Area, Southern California, or the Acela corridor, which is kind of New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. And lots of people, including Steve Case, who was at the last Heartland Summit, have been talking about the rise of the rest and really trying to support the growth of entrepreneurial ecosystems, startup businesses, economic development outside of the coasts. So one of the things we've been talking about is how do you do that in Heartland communities? I think all 10 of our points are extremely valid for the Heartland. But importantly, really providing support. One of the things that I think distinguishes the Heartland is the fact that because rents are cheaper, the great Jane Jacobs always said it was basically about affordable space. If you had cheap, affordable space, you got really interesting arts and cultural music scenes and great restaurants and even startup companies. Well, the coastal cities have become, unbelievably unaffordable. So when I would come to visit the Heartland, in fact, my first time I went to Bentonville, I said, what are all these cool coffee shops and restaurants and a really cool museum, which is an art gallery, a hotel, which is a museum, which is an art gallery. And it became clear to me that the Heartland communities had less expensive real estate. So they were attracting really interesting restaurant people and chefs and people who wanted to open a coffee shop or a small business or a startup. So I think giving advice to small businesses, obviously big companies are going to know how to reopen their facilities, but small companies need that advice. The other thing is making sure the arts and cultural infrastructure of the Heartland is maintained. If you think about right in Bentonville and close by the Crystal Bridges Museum, if you think about in Tulsa, the Woody Guthrie Museum, all of the things that have happened in the Heartland that are really significant in arts and culture, that's going to be difficult to maintain because they're going to take a hit. So doing all of that. And I think the other thing is making sure that frontline workers get not only the protection they need, but get the wages and salaries they need. They're the true heroes of this. So I think all of those things are important. And I do think this is an opportunity for Heartland communities to not only grow and attract people, but also to grow based on these remote workers. A lot of us, all of us professional and knowledge workers are working remotely, most of us. We're going to have a lot more choice in where we live. We're not going to be as tied to the office. So not everybody. Some people are still going to love the big city. That's great. But there'll be a lot more people who say, I want to move to my family with my kids. I want to have a backyard. I want a swing set. I want a pool, whatever I want. And I can get that a lot more affordably in the Heartland than I can do in the coast. And the Heartland should be ready for that.
Heartland Forward, and you alluded to this a little bit, released a report called Millennials Find New Hope in the Heartland. There's a report that talks about young firms growing and building into the Heartland. This was data and research that was done before the pandemic. But I think, to your point, people are going to kind of take a step back and consider, do I want to start a business in the Heartland? What are the positive things about that? So can you elaborate just a little bit on the strategy of the research before and what you think we might see in the future?
Well, Ross and I have cooperated on research for a long time, Ross Duvall, and he invented something that's very influential in a previous life. He invented something called the Tech Poll Index, which was an index of high technology firms concentrated in metropolitan areas. And it was a big inspiration for a book I wrote called The Rise of the Creative Class. And one of the noteworthy and sometimes controversial elements of that book is I came up with a formula called the 3 T's. You needed to do all 3 T's to be a successful and thriving region. The first T was technology. That was based on Ross's Tech Poll Index. And the second 2 T's were talent attract talent, young people and creative people, and tolerance. You needed to be an open-minded region with great quality of life, bike lanes, and all, the stuff people want to be, and great restaurants and bars to be successful. Well, I'm always delighted to work with Ross because he's a great mind and he's a great economist. So we developed this project looking at an index of young firms and young firm ecosystems, not just entrepreneurial firms, but great job generators in the United States tend to be smaller, more dynamic, younger firms. Speaking truth to fact is that the Heartland does lag on some of those young firms. I mean, those young firms tend to be concentrated in more dynamic regions of the country. And the report details that and lays out a plan, support those entrepreneurial ecosystems, develop partnerships with universities, attract talent, embolden quality of life. But one thing, in talking with both Ross and Joel Kotkin, that I think we're coming to view is there's going to be a great opportunity now for universities. And universities are one of the anchors of these ecosystems. There's many anchors of them, but you don't get a great entrepreneurial region without a great research university. Now, the Heartland has many good universities, but I think there'll be many faculty members who are living in coastal cities, in big, tall apartment buildings. Nothing wrong with that. I lived in one with an elevator that's jammed, or having to take a train or subway to work. Now, there'll be many young faculty members who love that and will flock to it. But there'll be people with families and little kids who go, that's not for me. Moreover, many of these universities will have cutbacks because of state funding cuts, because of tuition cuts, whether they can open in the fall or not. What an opportunity for the Heartland to attract superstar faculty now by providing a good job, a nice place to live, having an environment that's a nice place to live, and some research money. So one of the things we've been talking about is there an opportunity in the Heartland now, not only to spur young firm creation, but to actually boost the whole ecosystem by a focused effort to attract superstar academic talent. And you can go on from there. You can go out and try to pursue all sorts of talented people who want more space, maybe a single family home, maybe less cost. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity. Look, the point of this is this pandemic is going to be a real challenge for cities and states across this country, small and big, heartland and coastal. Those that have a strategy and that are intentional and that see in this horrific crisis and challenge and opportunity, they are going to be the places that do better. So one of the things that I'm so interested in is working with the Heartland Forward, working with my colleagues Ross Duvall and Joel Kotkin to actually develop a plan based on our research, but a plan that's articulated and developed in light of what can we do to reopen, and then what would be an interesting recovery strategy to boost small firms, to make sure small business works, to make sure arts and culture remain sustainable, to make sure government can finance itself, to make sure airports can work, to make sure universities can function, and then a long-term recovery plan. This is like disaster recovery. First, you have to fix the problem, and then you need a recovery strategy. I'm just excited to be able to work on that in the concrete reality of Northwest Arkansas, the Delta, and the Heartland.
One of the points, kind of going back to your 10-point plan, I wanted to kind of hit on is in Bentonville and many Heartland communities, arts, culture, and recreation are not only well received by residents, but are important to economies as well. And for instance, bicycling provides $137 million in economic benefits just for Northwest Arkansas alone. Why is this one of your top 10 priorities?
So if you look back 20 years ago, I was living in Pittsburgh, Bentonville, Northwest Arkansas, the Heartland. They were really different places than the coast. The coast had better restaurants, better coffee shops, better amenities, better museums, better hotels. It was a different world. Now, when I come to Bentonville or go to Pittsburgh or go to Milwaukee, I can name Indianapolis. I can name 100 of these communities, Tulsa. The amenities are often better. And people, why does that matter? Having people expect this stuff. People are not only making choices today on where a good job is, they want to have a good life for themselves and their partners and their families. And what's so interesting, in 20 years, it's almost reversed itself. You have better restaurants, independently owned restaurants, better coffee shops because of benefactors. You have great art museums like Crystal Bridges. But outdoor recreation really matters. And, I picked this up more than 20 years ago when I wrote my book, Rise of the Creative Class. I said something really silly in that book. My dad worked in a factory. My mom was a homemaker. Exercise for them was like ridiculous. Like, would my mother go for a jog? Would my father put on like Lycra and go on a bike? It was just bananas. But for knowledge workers, exercise, being physically fit, because you work with your mind all day, you want to recharge and just be better. So outdoor recreation becomes a really big part. Look, biking is now not only recreation. We're seeing big city after big city add hacked, jerry-rigged bike lanes because nobody wants to get on transit. So the ability in the heartland to get around by a bike and not have to depend on a car, never mind not have to get on a train, is a big deal. And it's a big deal directly in terms of the economic stuff it stimulates. You have a great bike race in the heartland. Several great bike races, but two, it's a talent attracting machine. Arts, culture, restaurant amenities, coffee shop amenities, and outdoor amenities. So what's so remarkable to me is to see the shift. 20 years ago, these kind of amenities were big city amenities. 20 years later, remarkably in America, smaller communities and smaller regions actually have better, in some ways better. There's the Metropolitan Museum and the Museum of Art and all of that, and the Cleveland Symphony. They're wonderful. But somehow, and the Lakers and the Celtics, but some other amenities, local amenities, are now better in the heartland. And that's a reason why you're seeing people now saying, I'll move. Because people know that they're not sacrificing big city living to go to the heartland. They actually can get many of the amenities that they're used to and relish, and a more affordable place to live with more space if they relocate out of the big coastal city to a heartland community.
It's always exciting to see heartland communities in the travel magazines of places to go visit because of the things that you've mentioned that they have built and sustained in the heartland communities. So Richard, as always, it's such a pleasure to talk to you and learn a little bit more about what you're thinking, what you're working on. And we obviously love having you on the Heartland Forward team. Just in closing, though, would love to hear from you. You've mentioned you've traveled all across the country. You're talking to many local leaders and experts focused on community advancement. What have you seen in the past month since you helped co-author the 10-point plan with regards to preparing for what comes next? Who is giving you hope in leading here and why?
Well, I'm very fortunate in that we're beginning to work on the reopening plan for Northwest Arkansas. And I'm also working with cities like Toronto and New York City. And Newark, my hometown. So from big cities across this country to smaller communities, there is this focus on reopening and recovery. And, one of the great things about Americans are willing to take risks. They'll do what's smart. They'll make sure mom and dad and grandma are protected. But able-bodied Americans are willing to, this is the way we are wired in America, maybe because we're immigrants and we came from places and we take risks. But so what's so interesting to me is how so many governors and mayors and communities are now thinking we have to prepare for this. We'd love to have the testing and tracing. We'd love to have all that stuff in place, but it's not in place. So there are things we can do. We can actually figure out ways to socially distance. We can wear a mask if we need to wear a darn mask. We can begin to reconfigure our shops, give small businesses advice, make sure the hair salon is spaced out. All of the stuff we need to do to get up and running. So that's what's so heartening to me. And we're going to do it, and ultimately, look, this is a terrible thing, this coronavirus. We wish it would have never happened. We have public health advances. We have antiviral technology. We will develop a vaccine. We will manage our way through this god-awful thing. And part of it is getting back up and running safely and securely. So that's what's heartened to me, is how much Americans want to get back to work, want to get back to doing things, don't want to cower in place. And let's do it as smartly and as safely and as securely as we can. And let's, let's take this as a warning shot. Let's do as best we can. But this is not the first one, and it won't be the last one. Let's get ready. So let's not only reopen and recover, let's prepare our city so that if another one happens, this time we are ready to nip it in the bud.
Well, thanks, Richard. It is very important work, and we appreciate the partnership and the continued efforts. I'm with you. I think there is hope. The residents of our communities and the business leaders are ready to start building again, and we can do it all together. So appreciate your time. I look forward to being in touch, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Angie. It's great seeing you, and hope to see you in person soon.
Okay. Thank you, Richard.